All right, you're very welcome along to the end of week 2 and the start of week 3. Football week 2 is done, week 3 is nearly here, and we're looking forward, and we're going to look back as well. Pat Mahomes is obviously the second coming of Jesus, and Fitzmagic is real. You can forget everything you know and buckle in for what promises to be another entertaining week of NFL. We're going to talk with Cian Fahey a little bit later on. We're also going to play a bit of John Gonzalez and Mike Carlson too. But first, it's PFF's Sam Monson. Sam, how are you?
Doing good, Jer. How about you?
Yeah, I'm pretty good. There's a load of different things we can talk about. And the best part about this part of the season is that even the crappy teams are interesting because they're like insanely crap to be crap the first 2 weeks of the season. I'm looking at you, Buffalo, and I'm talking about that. But let's talk about some of the good stuff that's been happening. How real is what's going on in Chicago at the minute, and the excitement that the whole franchise feels because of the Khalil Mack trade has obviously seemed to kind of allow them to begin to build something real.
Yeah, I think they are. And, you know, the Seattle game is I think has to be taken with the context that this Seattle team is not what it's been over the past few years. So the fact that they were able to roll them over, I don't think is as big an achievement as it would have been the past couple of seasons. But really, this team has been moving in the right direction for a while. The Khalil Mack trade allowed them to kind of kick into high gear and just accelerate that whole project on defense really quickly. You know, when you find a top 5 defender in the NFL, it's just going to transform everything. He was able to do that for an Oakland defense that wasn't very good either. But Chicago retained their entire secondary this offseason. Like most of those guys were somehow scheduled to hit free agency at the same time. They managed to tie them all down. Really, the whole team was going to come down to what Mitchell Trubisky can be at quarterback. And the situation around him is so much better this year. He's now got receiving weapons to play with in a way he didn't last season. It was probably the worst receiving core in the league. You bring in Matt Nagy from the Kansas City Chiefs. He's working that Andy Reid offense that we see has been so successful in Kansas City now with Mahomes, in Philadelphia with Doug Peterson and the Eagles just coming off a Super Bowl. Matt Nagy's bringing the same system to Chicago. It's the same stuff. So really the only question mark is how good can Trubisky be, and can he take advantage of what now appears to be a really good roster around him?
They've also, Vic Fangio defense, how important are these defensive and offensive coordinators? It seems like unbelievably important is the short answer. But if that's the case, why do more teams not actually go all out to try and get good ones?
I think it's the guys at either extremes are really important. If you have a really smart offense or defensive mind, it can transform a unit. And if you have a really bad one, it can just hold everything back. It almost doesn't matter how talented your team are. If you're running a scheme that's so simplistic or so vanilla or just so backwards, there's no way those guys can overcome it over the long haul. The NFL is too good as a baseline for those guys to be successful. And then the flip side, obviously, is the guys like Sean McVay or Doug Peterson or, you know, defensive minds like Wade Phillips. When you get a guy who really, really knows what he's doing, those guys completely change the outcome. But everybody else in the middle, I think, are pretty much of a muchness. And the issue with that is there's only a couple of guys that you can go after every single year. You know, it's tough to know, or it's tough to hammer a team for not relentlessly pursuing a guy that doesn't obviously scream difference maker in a way a guy like Sean McVay did, or, you know, a guy like Wade Phillips consistently does.
Yeah, the Wade Phillips thing, like, is everybody being a bit wise after the event? Because it didn't seem like there was a whole heap of people who were in for him. Obviously, so McVay got the job and then he hired Wade Phillips, and that was all done in quite a quick period of time. But up until the point, obviously, where McVay gets the job, Phillips is still out there and kind of like, yeah, I'm available to talk to people. It didn't really seem like there was a crowd of people already in jobs beating their path to Wade Phillips' door. And now we see, okay, granted, the talent is pretty amazing. And now we see everybody going, well, this guy's really good.
Yeah, I mean, the talent obviously helps. When you look at his best defenses, they've all been stacked with defensive talent, which is obviously going to make any scheme look better. But he definitely has a scheme that's able to take advantage of those guys in terms of matching up and playing man coverage and being aggressive on defense. I think a lot of his sort of struggles to land a job, it's an ageism thing. I mean, it sounds stupid, but everybody wants to get a coach like Sean McVay you can tie down for a decade or whatever, even if you know, in the greater scheme of things, the chances of them lasting that length of time are minimal. The turnover in coaching staff at the NFL level is so huge. But I think everyone hates the idea of signing a guy who you think is probably only going to be there for a couple of years before he moves on or before you're done with him. It's just this weird sort of dynamic that exists in their head where they want to get the young guy, the guy to be. They almost want to have some level of responsibility for this guy becoming the next big thing, rather than just signing a guy they know is good already.
Yeah, I'd say a lot of it has to do with people being threatened. This is a complete tangent, but now that you mentioned the ageism thing, what exactly is Tom Coughlin's role in Jacksonville, and how much credit does he get for the fact that before he was there, the franchise is a joke? As he gets there, they obviously acquire all this talent through being crap for so long that they get amazing draft picks year after year after year after year. But like, it does seem that it would be coincidental that he's there and suddenly there's this mad improvement.
Yeah, I think they've installed him as de facto GM without removing the GM title from Dave Caldwell. I think it's been a sort of just a shift in power in the dynamic in the front office there, but effectively Tom Coughlin has come in, he's assumed all the duties of the GM, and then they've just shifted around the responsibility so they don't have to sack guys, don't have to completely turn over. I think there's a big thing in terms of screaming crisis when you make sweeping changes at giant or firings in positions of serious senior authority within the organization. But I think Coughlin is effectively the GM. He's the guy that's making the football calls now when it comes to talent acquisition and to the draft and free agency and all that kind of stuff. And it has had a pretty immediate impact. Just
to go back to the Wade Phillips conversation, really, it was it's really a conversation about the Rams. The start to the season has been sensational, but in retrospect, it's against the Raiders and against the Cardinals. So not wanting to overreact after 1 week is obviously something people don't want to do, but overreacting after two, you feel a bit more comfortable. But at the same time, it looks like the Cardinals and the Raiders could be two of the worst teams in the NFL this year.
I think the Cardinals absolutely are. They didn't cross the 50-yard line until like the last couple of plays in that game. They were desperate. They reminded me, like an MMA fighter at the end where he's beaten and he's just curling up, like waiting until the ref pulls the guy off him to stop the beating. That's basically what the Cardinals were doing in that game, was turtling up and hoping somebody pulled the Rams off them. But they didn't. There's no official in the NFL to do that, so they just kept on beating on them. We know this Rams team is good, but I think the question is still how good. We're not going to know that until they're tested to a significant level. Honestly, within the division, they may end up going pretty much the entire season unopposed. The Seahawks, as I said before, are not the force they were. The 49ers, I think, are heading in the right direction, but as a roster, they're just not as good as the Rams. They'll probably be their closest competitors. And then the Cardinals, they're terrible. They're shooting for the number one overall pick, I suspect. So the Rams may well waltz to this division, and we probably won't actually know how good they are until they face legitimate playoff teams, at which point you don't have a lot of margin for error at that stage. Yeah,
it's a team, though, who have been through that last season, and by keeping together most of the parts that they've been able to keep, and by pushing the chips in for this year with the big contracts and the big free agents, they're trying to make a Super Bowl run. That's not no genius to say that, but it does feel like they're equipped, with the one possible exception of depth in the face of injuries, to make a proper Super Bowl run this year.
They really are. I mean, having a quarterback on a rookie contract basically enables you to gamble big for everything else, because you don't have to pay the guy $30 million a year, like the Vikings do with Kirk Cousins or the Packers do with Aaron Rodgers. Now you've got money to spend elsewhere on the roster, so they've gone and spent the money big on the best player in the NFL, period, Aaron Donald. They've loaded up in the secondary with some playmakers. Aqib Talib and Marcus Peters so far this year, I think, have combined allowed like 38 yards or something. So those guys are legitimate shutdown players on the back end. You've got an incredible source of pressure up front in Donald and Sue, even if there's still basically nobody on the edge to bring pressure. That defense, I think, will be legit. It will be another Wade Phillips top-end defense. And the last time he was able to craft, the best defense in the league, it was able to drag like a busted-up Peyton Manning and a terrible Brock Osweiler to a Super Bowl. So, Jared Goff, however many questions remain about just how good he can be, he's better than either of those guys were that season.
Yeah, and obviously there's a huge reluctance within the NFL to generally pay running backs, but they decided they were going to pay Gurley because they realised exactly how important he was to them and the multiple things that he's actually capable of doing for them in the offence, rather than risking the next one off the production block being able to continue to do that. They were like, no, we have a guy, we know exactly what he's able to do, let's just pay him and get it done.
Yeah, it's become this fascinating argument right now within the NFL generally and at all levels. Just how important are running backs? Are they overrated? How does that whole dynamic work? And when we're digging through all of our analytics data, the actual quality of the running back is one of the less important aspects for how successful your running game is going to be. So if you have a really good offensive line, if you have really good run blocking, that is way more important than how good the running back is for how successful your run game is going to be. So when you're thinking about where you're going to allocate your resources, you're way better off putting the money into the guys that are blocking for him because they're the ones that are going to generate the yardage. And no matter how good the running back is, he's only going to be a value add at that point. On specific plays, he can do something special. But if your offensive line, if your run blocking sucks, almost no running back in the league is able to overcome that. And then the other aspect of that is passing is everything. You know, the passing game is king in today's NFL, not just how often teams are doing it, but when you start looking at expected points added and the actual nitty-gritty of the analytics, passing is just so much more important than running. So if you're going to get a running back high and you're going to invest in him with big money, you need a guy that can catch the ball, that can pass block, and can be a real factor in that side of the game. And Todd Gurley can do that. Like, he's a legitimate threat, catching the ball and making plays with the ball in his hands as a receiver. So I think that way he kind of justifies the money because you know the line is good, you know he's good as a receiver. You can invest in the running back that will take advantage of those things.
Yeah, and that's what Le'Veon Bell is basically trying to point out, that he is a good receiver and a threat as a receiver, and so he should be getting paid both receiver and running back money. Nobody wants to give it to him.
Yeah, but he's almost getting bitten by the other side of that because the Steelers have one of the best offensive lines in the league. James Conner comes in, he's making spectacular one-handed Odell Beckham catches down the sideline. Suddenly you're like, well, where's my bargain? My bargaining has just disappeared because those are the guys generating the yardage, and he's proven he can be a really good receiver as well. So now my leverage just went up in smoke.
The offensive line question, I didn't intend to talk about the Giants, but the Giants have got one of the best collections of talent if you look receiver, tight end, running back, and they have an issue everywhere else. Their offensive line is not great and their quarterback is not great. Is it possible their quarterback could be decent if the offensive line was any better, or is Eli just finished and so therefore this is just this giant hole that they're going to have to try and fix over the next 18 months before they're relevant again?
I mean, I think it's a bit of both. I think Eli probably is on his way out and he would be better behind a better offensive line. You know, they have tried to address the offensive line a little bit, but the guys they brought in, Nate Solder at left tackle in free agency, Will Hernandez in the draft at left guard, those guys are run blockers first. They could be really good run blockers, but they're both got question marks when it comes to pass protection. Eric Flowers at right tackle is one of the worst pass protectors in the league. The whole offensive line together is really causing Eli Manning some problems, and he's not good enough anymore to overcome that. You know, his 2011 season on the way to the Super Bowl was one of the single greatest extended performances we've seen under pressure that season. The Giants gave up an incredible amount of pressure that season from the offensive line, and Eli Manning was amazing in the face of it, culminating ultimately in that Super Bowl win. He's not capable of doing that anymore. So unless that offensive line repairs itself around him, he's going to struggle. And it really just pulls into focus the decision to pass on quarterbacks at number 2 overall and draft the running back. As good as Saquon Barkley is, like unless Eli Manning either completely turns it around unexpectedly or Kyle Lauletta, the guy they stumbled into lower in the draft, accidentally turns out to be fantastic, I can't see a way they're not going to regret passing on franchise quarterbacks at that point.
Even if they had got a franchise quarterback at that point, they'd still need to fix the offensive line. Like, you can probably do a little bit of that through free agency and then lower down in the draft. Would that have been the right course of action? So pick Sam Darnold, say, at 2, or trade back a couple of spots and try and pick up an extra draft pick that you can use on somebody in the offensive line, and also go later and get one of the other quarterbacks. But either way, try and fix these things.
Yeah, I mean, the key to offensive line plays, it's not about how good your offensive linemen are. You don't need the Dallas offensive line. You don't need a series of first-round all-pro players. You just need there to be nobody on that line that sucks. You just need 5 guys that can hold their head above water and at least let the quarterback and the running back have a platform to succeed. So with that in mind, I think you can kind of you can repair that relatively easily if you know what you're doing. You know, I think they should have taken the quarterback at 2, whoever they decided was their best guy, Darnold. And then I don't have a problem with Will Hernandez in the second round. I think he was a really good guard prospect. He's a guy that's going to take a little bit of time, but you could repair the offensive line at that point. It's just going to take a little bit of work. But now you have a quarterback long-term tied down to give you the time to do it. With Eli Manning, as old as he is and as sort of far into his decline as he appears to be, that's a pretty fast-ticking clock right now. You don't have the time to be able to repair that offensive line the way you would with a rookie.
The traditional story about decline is that, particularly at the quarterback position, it almost happens overnight, and especially at the running back position, you hit a wall and that's the end of it. You never manage to make a proper comeback. Adrian Peterson maybe hit his wall this week. We'll see as the season goes on. But the other obvious person to talk about in this context is Tom Brady after a Patriots defeat where they weren't really in the game against Jacksonville. And in those circumstances where the temperature's hitting 100 degrees and it's absolutely boiling and, you know, I would be willing to write this performance off a little bit, even though he's 41. And I know I'm not like sticking my neck out in the line by saying that the Patriots in September are going to be the done deal here. But I think this is a far more important game from a Jacksonville perspective than it is for New England.
Yeah, agreed. And the Patriots kind of have a history of some games in September that they don't really go all out to. You know, they haven't got a great record in September. It's as the year goes on, they kick it into high gear and they really show what they're about every single season. So I wouldn't be pushing panic buttons on the Patriots. And I think the area of concern is that their receivers are not good. It's one of the worst receiving corps Tom Brady's ever had in his NFL career, even with Gronk still there. Josh Gordon coming over has a real potential to transform that instantly. He gives you a legitimate number one type of receiver in terms of body type. I mean, he's right up there with Julio Jones in terms of the most freakish athletes at the wide receiver position in the NFL. Plus, they get Julian Edelman back in a couple of weeks after suspension. He is a major kind of security blanket to Tom Brady in terms of reliably knowing you can pick up 5 yards almost every single play. So I think it was a statement game for Jacksonville to go out there and show that they'd learned the lessons from the AFC Championship game. They were actually in the same kind of position in terms of having a lead, getting the ball back late in the first half, and instead of easing up, they kept the foot in the gas and they kept going. So I think that was big for them. For the Patriots, I think it was just one of those games that quite early on they decided to chalk up to, yeah, this one's probably going south, but it's only September. Let's move on.
What's the story of Bortles? There was a suggestion during the commentary that we saw him become a man in the playoffs last year, and I was like, okay. I mean, people do get better as careers go on if they're getting the right coaching and if they fix the issues that they had. Has he fixed some of his issues, or is this a small sample size versus the other sample size that we have, which suggests he's a mediocre at best quarterback?
Yeah, look, Blake Bortles played really well against the Patriots. I think Occam's razor would say that the far more likely thing to have happened is that a highly volatile quarterback had a good game, went in at the high end of his spectrum against the Patriots, and he's going to come back down to earth pretty quickly. Then a reasonably bad quarterback became very good over the course of an offseason. I think Blake Bortles is one of these high-variance quarterbacks. You can get spectacular plays out of him. You can get terrible plays out of him within the same game often. And, you know, those guys can go on runs of play at both ends of the spectrum. I just suspect Blake Bortles is one of these guys that's going to swing back in the other direction. And it's probably going to be pretty soon.
Two weeks in a row we've had ties. The Packers and Vikings obviously playing out to a tie, primarily because a bunch of kickers are not that good, but also because some spectacular quarterback play. Unfortunate quarterback play in some aspects as well. On one leg, Aaron Rodgers still looks to be pretty sensational, and still that offensive line are able to protect him pretty well at this point. Is there a full season of Aaron Rodgers on one leg that we can continue to watch and think he can still win a Super Bowl like this?
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is that Aaron Rodgers being hobbled in the pocket in some ways actually benefits that offense. At one point during the game, I didn't check what the full-time numbers were, but at one point during that game, his average time to throw was just a tick above 2 seconds. Now, most quarterbacks are 2.5. Aaron Rodgers is usually somewhere towards 3. So a full second, 150% essentially more time to rush the quarterback is what a defensive pass rusher usually has going up against Aaron Rodgers than he had against the Vikings. So him being on one leg essentially forces them to get the ball out really quickly to limit the damage that can happen to him. And he's one of the quarterbacks that's so good at doing that it really makes it hard for a defense to cover, because you have no time to work with. You're never going to get pressure on him, which is when all the bad things of playing quarterback happen. So your coverage needs to be in tight coverage immediately and be able to hold up and deal with those quick passes. And it's really hard to do. We saw it against Chicago in the second half when he came back. Everybody said Khalil Mack disappeared. Did he get tired in the second half because he only came in, late in that trade? He didn't get tired. That Rodgers just sped up his delivery by like a second. There was no opportunity for Khalil Mack to actually do any damage because the ball was just gone before he had a shot. The Vikings have one of the best pass rushes in the league. Again, didn't get a whole lot of pressure because they had no opportunity to do it. So I really think Aaron Rodgers' injury, as silly as it seems, it does take away his ability to extend and to do crazy things on the run. But it makes that offense really hard to defend because he's so good at the quick game as well.
Sam, good stuff. Anything you're looking forward to this weekend in particular?
No, I think this is another kind of fun week of games. I'm just looking forward to seeing if those teams that are for real can show it this week. This is week 1 and 2. You get some crazy things happen. Week 1 is the crazy week. Week 2 is the overreaction to the crazy week. Week 3 is when you tend to sort out what's actually happening this season.
Yeah. I mean, if Ryan Fitzpatrick can do it 3 weeks in a row, then all of a sudden we've got to start expecting that he might be able to do this for the rest of the season.
This is the 2 weeks he's had are the single highest PFF grade for any quarterback in 2 weeks we've seen since 2006. It's the best opening to any season we've seen by a significant distance as well. So my colleague here, Steve Palazzolo, keeps talking about Jameis Winston as a high volatile quarterback, and he thinks that 1 year Jameis is just going to put it all together, and we're going to see nothing but high-end Winston for the entire season, the way we saw with Cam Newton and Carson Palmer in 2015. I just think it would be hilarious if it was Ryan Fitzpatrick that did that this year and kept Winston on the bench the whole time.
Yeah, well, it'd be an amazing story for Tampa Bay. Good stuff, Sam. Thanks a million for joining us.
Anytime. Take it easy.
Sam Monson from PFF there talking to us about a bunch of the stories this week. And as ever, if you've got any questions for Sam, you can tweet us. You can tweet me at Jerry Gilroy. You can tweet the show at Off the Ball. Sam is at PFF_Sam as well. In a couple of minutes' time, we're going to get Cian Fahey on to talk about some of the other stories that we haven't covered there, a bit more into that Seahawks-Chicago game, and a bit more looking forward to the weekend's games. Got a couple of clips here to play you from our regular shows from Off the Ball on the radio on News Talk and from OTB AM. We're going to hear from John Gonzalez of The Ringer and from Mike Carlson, who of course you'll be familiar with from the BBC's coverage of the Super Bowls over recent seasons. Going to talk a good bit here about Josh Gordon and the Patriots.
It's interesting. The Patriots tend to take some flyers on wide receivers that might have fallen out of favor with other teams for various reasons. They did it with Randy Moss. It worked out really well. They did it with Chad Ochocinco, nay Chad Johnson. It didn't work out so well. So it'll be interesting to see how it goes with Josh Gordon. He's an absolute physical monster, but he hasn't really played much over the last 5 years. 5 years ago, he had a really good season, and since then, obviously, he's had a lot of issues with substance abuse. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with him in New England.
Yeah, when you speak of substance abuse there, it did seem that was something of the past. Like, I think most people will have seen, anybody who's into the NFL anyway, will have seen that interview he did with GQ last year where he spoke about getting over that addiction, and he spoke about actually managing that addiction, like using before matches and stuff like that, which was insane. But it seemed that he had been over that. Do we have any clarity as to what's happened over the last 6 months or so?
We don't, not really. He came back from the preseason pretty late, rejoined the team, wasn't in much of training camp because he said he was focused on his health and his well-being. And it seemed like the Browns were okay with that they were in the loop. And then I guess at some point along the way, they decided that they and Josh Gordon should probably part ways. And along come the New England Patriots and got a fifth-round pick for Josh Gordon, which frankly I'm kind of surprised they got anything for Josh Gordon after telegraphing that they were going to move on from him. But maybe New England was the perfect spot for him because, again, they have tried this before. They do need a wide receiver. And it could, physically, he has all the tools. It's just whether or not, with his mental health, his mental health and his substance abuse, whether he'll be able to do that.
true. But when you look back, they never really have. They've always had a number of good guys. They're missing a couple of people. They're bad at a couple of spots. They looked slow against Jacksonville, but they looked slow against Atlanta in the Super Bowl in the first half of that game. They looked slow against Philadelphia at times. I think they will get back into some kind of playoff form because that's the way they are. They scheme and they figure things out and they adjust to what they have or don't have. But I think they'll still be active in looking for a couple of parts that they need. I was looking back at their draft yesterday, and I would have done it completely differently. But you can't really argue with what they were trying to do. The weird thing in that draft is that they eschewed going after some people who might have been able to help them right away in order to get veteran players and future draft picks, which tells me that Belichick isn't going anywhere soon. So I think Miami now is a definite threat to them in the division, which will be interesting because they haven't really had competition in the division, for a few years now.
It's Mike Carlson speaking on OTBAM, echoing the preseason thoughts, it has to be said, of our next guest, Cian Fahey, who did actually say that he thought that the Dolphins could end up winning that division. You're pretty happy about life at the moment, Cian?
It's 2 weeks in. Let's calm down a little bit. The Dolphins are fortunate in the sense that they've still got the 2 games against the Bills to come, so you kind of feel like that's a guaranteed 2 more wins. And if you've got 4 wins there, you're halfway to 8-8, and you're on the precipice of the playoffs. So it does feel like they're in a really good position when you get off to a good start in the NFL. Because the season is so short, it's a really, really, really big thing.
Are the Dolphins any good?
Yeah, I think they're a lot better than they were obviously last year because Ryan Tannehill is back, and that's a huge upgrade over Jay Cutler's corpse that was playing there last year. But having Ryan Tannehill back in an offense with Albert Wilson, with Jakeem Grant looking a lot better, with Danny Amendola, these are much better receivers for them than Jarvis Landry was, because Jarvis Landry used to have the ball forced to him, and they used to run the offense and through these screens and these short throws because they overrated how good Jarvis Landry was. They forced the ball to him too much. And now they've got guys who they don't seem to rate as highly. They're spreading the ball around much better. The only concern I really have for them right now is the offensive line was going to take a big step forward this year and has taken a big step forward. But a big part of that step forward was Josh Sitton at left guard. He's a pass-blocking left guard, established veteran, 34, 35 years of age, still very good player. But a big part of it was the cohesion he was creating, the leadership he gave that unit. And now he's gone for the year. He got injured after week 1. He's not going to play again. And they've got inadequate replacements for him. But it's also now going back to being a young line, which has been a big issue for them over the years, where it's not so much guys getting beaten in blocks, it's guys missing their assignments and not communicating the way they need to communicate. And that puts a lot more pressure on Tannehill. If that holds up, this Dolphins team will be really, really good.
Okay, so are they realistic contenders to win the division? Are what we're seeing from the Patriots something that you'd be thinking, over the course of a season, perhaps this Patriots squad is not as good as the previous Patriots teams that we've seen reach Super Bowls and win them?
Absolutely. We knew this coming in. That you went through that roster, the talent isn't not there. But it is going to change significantly over the next couple of weeks. Josh Gordon being there, assuming he stays on the field, which I think is a fair assumption. The Browns gave up on Josh Gordon last week, but everyone kind of assumed, there was a suspension coming. But when the actual details came out, it kind of seems like the Browns just bungled this. It seems like they messed up what they were doing, and they overreacted to him having a hamstring issue that he might not have even had. He might have been trying to force his way out of there. And we can criticize an individual player for doing that, but the way the Browns have been run the last couple of years, I don't blame them. Hugh Jackson and Greg Williams and everyone else there is running that team into the ground. So when Gordon gets to the Patriots, I assume he's going to play. And when Julian Edelman comes back in 2 weeks, that's going to completely change the identity of their offense. Because Chris Hogan's going to go from being their number 1 receiver, too big of a role for him, not something he can do, to being their 3rd choice or being their 4th choice when you include Gronk. And the other thing about this is Gordon is a perfect complement to Edelman. This is a little bit like, I'm not going to say it's exactly like, because obviously these are high standards, but it's a little bit like Randy Moss and Wes Welker working together and Dante Stallworth as the 3rd receiver from that 2007 or 2018, whichever year it was. The beauty of it is Gordon's going to be the big play threat. He's going to stretch the field. They're not going to ask him to do a whole lot besides run post routes, corner routes, deep sideline routes, and shallow crossing routes. So they'll keep him away from the middle of the field or working from the slot, working option routes. Edelman will do all of that, and he'll have more space to do it now because defenses have to focus on Gordon. This is a great move for the Patriots, and I know we have this tendency to just praise everything the Patriots do, but this one really, really is because they haven't even given up an actual draft pick. They've given up a 5th round pick, but they get a 7th back if Gordon doesn't play enough. So basically what they've given up is about 60 to 80 places in the draft at a point in the draft when the difference between a 5th and 7th is negligible anyway. So they've really given up nothing.
Yeah. It did feel like there was a weird conservatism around the NFL when it came to trying to get Josh Gordon. And I wonder how much due diligence actually happens. I wonder how much information each of the teams have on the lifestyle of somebody like Gordon. Like how familiar are they with what he did this offseason when he was not around the Browns training camp? The story was that he hadn't had a remission, but that he needed to look after his health, and so he'd gone to make sure that was okay. Like, you put all that now together in retrospect, and the notion that perhaps he was trying to leave and force his way out, it makes a lot more sense now.
Yeah, and the other thing is he's at the stage of because he's in different. When you fail a drug test in the NFL, you go into different stages. So the first stage, you're allowed to get tested something like twice a week or twice a month or something like that. The second stage, they can test you whenever they like, and the third stage, they basically test you every other day, and you're constantly getting tested. So if there was anything to this, anything more beyond what we know so far, we would know about it, because he's in a stage where he can't get away with any minor infraction. So, and it's the same with but actually, this is the thing that I have to wonder about now, because a couple of weeks ago, Martavis Bryant was meant to be suspended for the whole season, and week 1 goes, he's not suspended, the Raiders re-sign him, and he plays in week 2. So someone suggested to me that the NFL might be just changing their approach with these kind of infractions, that they're not going to punish guys anymore for this. I don't know if that's true. I haven't heard anything about it. It would be huge news if it was. So maybe it's happening slowly behind the scenes and this is the start of it. Maybe not. I don't know. But this whole situation has just helped the Patriots.
Josh Gordon's biggest crimes, as far as the NFL have been concerned, are to smoke a few spliffs and to have some beers on a plane. One of his suspensions came after drinking some beers on a plane because he was supposed to be entirely sober, and that might have cost him a year because it was his 3rd strike. But like, this is mad. And I don't know why the clubs and the owners don't actually take this on more, because the Browns have lost out on having an absolutely astonishing talent on their team for largely the entire time that he's been there, for a few spliffs and a few beers. It's madness.
Well, it's the conservatism of that league and who are in charge of running, who are the owners and what their political beliefs are and who they support, and that kind of frames the way they look at these things. So if you go to the Chiefs and the Bengals right now, two 2-0 teams, two teams with really, really, really high-powered offenses, two teams littered with stars. If you compare what Josh Gordon has done, where he's hurt nobody, except for himself maybe, in terms of drinking, I don't think he was even doing it that much to harm himself properly. If you compare him to Tyreek Hill choked and nearly strangled his pregnant girlfriend when he was in college. Joe Mixon punched a woman in the face, was caught on camera, knocked her out completely. He hasn't even missed any NFL games for it. He missed time in college, but it cost him any money because he still went in the 2nd round of the draft, I believe. So these guys are on the field and we've no issue with that. And they're just playing away, and they've done actual violent crimes, actual things that they were caught doing, and it was confirmed that they did them. And we're just here giving out to Josh Gordon and trying to get rid of Martavis Bryant and blaming all these receivers or all these players for doing different things that no one should really care about.
Yeah, it doesn't really make that much sense. You've explained how you think that he's going to have an impact on the Patriots season in terms of their offense. Is the Patriots defense good enough to actually last this season out? Are they going to get better the way that they traditionally do through scheme? Do they have enough talent on that team?
I think one of the things we talked about before the season was how few teams in the league have above average units on both sides of the ball. And the Patriots don't have a defense good enough, in theory, to win a Super Bowl or reach a Super Bowl. But because they're in the AFC, their contenders aren't really built to take advantage of the Patriots' weaknesses the way they are. So the big story of the season so far has been the Chiefs. I already mentioned that. But if you actually look at how the Chiefs have won games, they've got the best offense in the league, best special teams in the league, and the worst defense in the league. So you're the big contender, the big leading team in the AFC right now is not this team with a great defense and a great offense. So the Patriots don't have to reach that standard. They don't have to have a defense that's really, really good. If their offense with Brady can take advantage of the Chiefs in a one-on-one matchup, they still would be favourites to reach the Super Bowl. I think the one team that would scare them, and I know the Jaguars just beat them, but they won't be scared of the Jaguars. They know Blake Bortles is going to eventually do what Blake Bortles has done throughout his whole career. So they know in another matchup, they feel like they'll win that game. But the team that I think they should be scared of is the Bengals. The Bengals, we all kind of went out on the Bengals because of Andy Dalton and his disastrous year last year, but that was really down to the offensive line. And they've fixed their offensive line. They've got a new rookie centre. They've got Cordy Glenn at left tackle, who the Bills gave them for free. It's like 10 spots in the first round, which is pretty much nothing in their pursuit of Josh Allen. They've gutted their roster and kind of ruined everything there. And the Bengals have benefited from that. So they now have John Ross, AJ Green, Tyler Eifert's coming back, and they have a couple of good tight ends there already. They have a couple of good running backs, a really great offensive line. Andy Dalton's good enough when he's set up properly. And the defense there is really, really good. So that's the team I really like in the AFC right now, outside of the obvious with the Chiefs.
Yeah, well, let's talk a bit about the Chiefs. We're seeing historic levels of production from Patrick Mahomes, and you're starting to hear those rumours about how amazing he was in training and how the Chiefs were like, yeah, let's start the Mahomes era. And in fairness to them, they were unbelievably patient last season, and they waited the whole way until he was going to be embedded in the culture and understand exactly what was going on. And it's kind of the perfect way to inherit a team. So you get a taste at the end of the season, not too much pressure, and everybody feels confident about it, and you've got those growing pains, most of them out of the way. There's no way you can keep this up, because the game would have completely changed. It'd be a completely different game if he can keep it up, but they are pretty exciting.
Oh yeah, that's probably the best offense in the league, but we should also need to remember that 3 weeks ago, Patrick Mahomes was throwing like 3 and 4 interceptions a day in training camp and kind of imploding on himself. So our sample here is tiny. My big takeaway from that game, we already knew that the Chiefs' offense was really good, but when you go through the actual touchdowns, like the first touchdown was after a long punt return. They were set up in the red zone, and the Steelers played this zone coverage, where they had 5 defenders in the middle of the field on Travis Kelce, and nobody covering Chris Conley running down the seam. No one from the moment he left the line of scrimmage to the point he was in the end zone when it was wide open. There was no deep safety. There was no single high safety. There weren't 2 safeties. There was literally nobody there except for a cornerback trying to run back. And there was a lot of that throughout that game, where the Chiefs' offense was really good and they pulled the defense apart, but the Steelers' defense was also atrocious. They tried a bunch of these different blitzes that never worked. They came from too deep with their linebackers. They came with their cornerbacks, their safeties, and the quarterback just had too much time. And I generally hate those blitzes because the quarterback does have enough time to get rid of the ball. Only one of those blitzes actually worked, and it was on the goal line, and it was in the third touchdown of the first quarter, where Mahomes checked the ball down to Kareem Hunt. Hunt is in behind 3 yards behind the line of scrimmage. He's got Terrell Edmonds right in front of him, the Steelers' first-round pick safety. This is everything the Steelers wanted from that play call. They got the ball behind the line of scrimmage with a defender in front of him, and Kareem Hunt just walks right past him. Just goes right into the end zone as if he's not there. So the Steelers' defense was the bigger story for me, and they're all blaming Antonio Brown now, and I don't understand that at all. But the Steelers' defense was atrocious. Obviously, when someone throws 6 touchdowns on you, it's a problem. But it reminded me of when Nick Foles threw 7 touchdowns against the Raiders, and it wasn't even like that. Raiders defense did not look like an NFL defense. There was no pressure at the quarterback, and the receivers were wide open all over the field.
So it's going to be a long year for the Steelers.
I think the Bengals are the best team in that division. I think the Ravens might be better than the Steelers, and I'm like lower on Joe Flacco than everyone else. And I think the Steelers might be closer to the Browns than those other 2 teams, which is kind of astonishing when you think about it.
Wow, when you think they tied in the opening day of the season, and I mean, they were maybe a little bit fortunate to get that in the end. I want to talk about the Packers-Vikings game, because Kirk Cousins obviously comes into the season with a whole heap of pressure on him. Week 1, there's a few very nice throws against the 49ers. Week 2, he manages to make this comeback, and really, if they have a kicker, they probably end up winning the game, but they're also fortuitous with the Clay Matthews call. For anybody who didn't see the Clay Matthews call, what exactly happened there, and what does this mean for the future of the game?
I love the idea that you think I know. If you can explain that. So basically, Cousins drops back in the pocket, and Clay Matthews beats the right tackle, and the guard cuts in between 2 of them. Cousins throws the ball just before Matthews arrives, and the ball sails, and it goes straight into the defender's hands. Game-ending interception. The Vikings have no timeouts left, and the clock can just be kneeled out, and Aaron Rodgers has the ball. But it stopped. There's a flag. Matthews has tackled Cousins like a split second after Cousins releases the ball. He catches him around the waist and falls forward with him. They said he picked him up. He didn't really pick him up. But the whole idea now is the rules in the NFL. You have to, because Tom Brady tore his ACL in 2008, you're not allowed to tackle quarterbacks low. Because Aaron Rodgers had a defender land on him last year and that broke his shoulder, you're not allowed to land on defenders. Because of head trauma in general, you're not allowed to touch quarterbacks in the head. So right now you have to be able to tackle a quarterback around the waist, wrap him, hold him up, turn and land on the ground while holding him above you, which is an impossible thing to ask a pass rusher to do in the speed of an NFL game. And that's what happened basically. The Vikings got very, very, very lucky. Last year, there were 2 interceptions that were ruled off from a late hit penalty. So that's 1 this year already. We'll probably have more because of the rule changes. But outside of that, Kirk Cousins had a very weird first 2 weeks. So if you're a big Kirk Cousins fan, your selling point has always been he's an efficient quarterback. You spread the defense out, and he picks you apart by making the right decisions before the snap. That hasn't been what he's been through 2 weeks. Through 2 weeks, he's been making exceptionally difficult throws that I didn't think he was capable of making, and making massive mistakes. So you've got this variance quarterback compared to the guy you were expecting to have this efficient quarterback. So if you were a big fan of Cousins, you're kind of wrong in what you're saying. Or if you were a big negative on Cousins, where I am, you're probably wrong because he's made these plays that you didn't think he could make. A very simple explanation of that. If you look at the Adam Thielen touchdown, the ball in the NFL gets put on one hash mark or in between a hash mark. The hash marks are, I would guess, 10 meters apart in the middle of the field. When you put the ball on the left hash mark, when the play starts, normally that means Cousins can't throw outside the numbers to the right side. The numbers are big, obviously you can see outside towards the sideline. In that throw for Thielen's touchdown, he's getting hit as he releases the ball. He's standing on the left hash mark, and he throws the ball outside the numbers to the right into a tiny, tiny window. He's never made that throw in his life. That's the best throw of his career. And funnily enough, I came on here last week saying he had 2 throws that were the best throws of his career as well. So he's at this point now where he's doing things I didn't think he was capable of doing. Can he sustain it and get rid of the mistakes? If he does, the Vikings should be clear Super Bowl favourites. If he doesn't, they'll still be Super Bowl contenders because that's how good that roster is.
Yeah, it makes sense now why Kyle Shanahan had such a fetish for him over such a long period of time. Just a final quick question about the impact of that tie for the Packers. Does this have, obviously it's entirely dependent on the knee of Aaron Rodgers, but that call, people are saying, might ultimately end up deciding seedings and who ends up getting home games. There's no change here in really in the hierarchy. The Vikings are a little bit ahead of the Packers, and that's how we should expect it to be for the rest of the season.
Yeah, we've got 14 games to go. We've got a long way to go. And the Packers, if you offered the Packers a tie before that game, I reckon they'd take it because they knew Aaron Rodgers wasn't healthy. They knew he could still play well enough, but they didn't expect to. I don't think they expected to win that game against the Packers or against the Vikings. The Vikings should still be the favourites in that division, especially because they were on the road. They'll get the Packers at home. They'd expect to win that game. But I would expect the Vikings to be a couple of games ahead of the Packers regardless. I don't think this is a situation where the division is going to come down to between 2 11-5 teams. I think the Packers, well, obviously you can't know because they both have a tie. But I think the Vikings are probably closer to 13-14 wins, whereas the Packers are closer to 9-10 over the course of the season.
Yeah, fair enough. Finally, purely to indulge me, I'm going to the Eagles-Colts game in Philadelphia on Sunday. Carson Wentz is returning. Pretty excited about the fact that Carson Wentz is playing instead of Nick Foles because, Nick Foles, congratulations on your Super Bowl and all, but let's see what the boy Wentz can do.
Yeah, just make sure you don't tell anyone there that you know me. I'm not that popular there.
What bit? Which bit? How did you manage to offend that entire fan base?
First, it was when I said Nick Foles wasn't that good during the Chip Kelly era, and then last year and the year before when I said Carson Wentz isn't that good. That'll be, honestly, I think that might be a good game because you're going to get the inconsistency with Wentz going back off his ACL. He's going to be rusty his first game back. But this Colts defense has played better than everyone expected it to play. So, one of their rookie linebackers just won Player of the Week because he had something like 14 tackles, a forced fumble, and a recovered fumble. Although somehow Khalil Mack played last week, so he didn't get it, even though he should be getting it, I think. But I think that'll be a good game. The only kind of concern you have is they just lost Mike Wallace, so they're bringing back Jordan Matthews, who's really poor, and Alshon Jeffrey, I don't think is going to play either. But it'll be fun. You get to go to an NFL game, and you get to see that offense that Doug Peterson gets to work.
Yeah.
And Andrew Luck, of course.
Yeah. But you've changed your mind, surely, about Carson Wentz at this point. He was pretty good. Look, it's obviously NFL films make America's game, but I watched it, I was saying earlier today, their one, and looking back at what Carson Wentz did last season, he was awesome. Well,
so here's the thing. During his rookie season, he was awful, absolutely awful. And he would drop back in the pockets, plant his feet, stare receivers down, and wildly overthrow the ball over the middle for interceptions all the time. First 2 games of last year continued to be awful. He threw something like 10 interceptable passes in 2 games. And then after that, he got a little bit better. He stopped throwing interceptable passes. His decision-making was really, really good. But his accuracy still isn't where it needs to be. The big part of this is the offensive line there was dominant. The scheme was really, really good for the quarterback. So he was able to put up decent numbers. But it was mostly just touchdown to interception ratio, which is the quickest way to becoming overrated as a quarterback. There was a time when Matthew Stafford threw something like 45 touchdowns. And I don't really think people celebrate Matthew Stafford as a great quarterback. So if you can throw a lot of touchdowns and have very few interceptions, people will think you're great. but it doesn't always mean you're great. I think coming into the year, I talked about him as something in 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, best quarterback in the league, which was a huge step forward after his rookie season, because his rookie season, he just looked like a disaster.
Cian, good stuff. Enjoy the weekend. Thanks a million.
Thanks, man.
Cian Fahey giving us his thoughts here on the NFL show on OTB every week. We can run you through the fixtures for this weekend. Obviously, the defending Super Bowl champions Eagles are indeed up against the Colts at home in Philadelphia. The rest of these fixtures, the Friday night game is the Browns at the Jets. Well, that could be a 9-all thriller. Jacksonville at Tennessee is the first game on the early slate on Sunday. Then it's Miami at Oakland, Kansas City at San Francisco. No, sorry, I'm reading these completely back to front. It's the Jets at Cleveland. It's Tennessee at Jacksonville. So a home game for the Kansas City Chiefs. Their first one. They're 2-0 this season. 49ers there. It's Buffalo at Minnesota. I think the spread was 17 points on that one. And you can see Minnesota sticking up 40 or 50 points. The Colts at the Philadelphia Eagles. Philadelphia desperately in need of a win with the first choice quarterback back. The Packers are at the Redskins, and the Saints take on the Atlanta Falcons after a pretty horrific start from the Saints so far. Our first game on the next slate, Giants at the Texans, the Bengals at the Panthers, Broncos at the Ravens. The Chargers are, so it's the LA Derby. The LA Chargers at the Rams. Again, that's going to be a high scoring game. The Bears at the Cardinals, the Cowboys at the Seahawks, two struggling teams. The Patriots at the Detroit Lions. We didn't talk about that, but we could easily have talked about Matt Patricia going up against the Patriots. And the Steelers against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers is the final game on Monday night. There will be points and there will be the ball thrown in the air a lot during that game. Wherever you're watching football this weekend, enjoy it, and we'll see you real soon. Good luck.